Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I have Robert Litman joining me again. I've interviewed Robert before. We're both residents here on Vashon Island, and I had him on my local radio show, Raise the Vibe. So I'm super excited to have him back to talk about his book, The Breathable Body. So a little bit about Robert, for those of you who aren't aware of him. Robert, for the past 30 plus years, has guided clients and students in the use of movement, breath, and sound as a tool for personal growth, restoring healthy breathing rhythms, structural alignment, and efficient body mechanics. He founded the Breathable Body in 2003. And I'm going to leave it right there because I think Robert has a lot to share about the Breathable Body, and I kind of want to jump right into it. So let's welcome in. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you
Nice
again,
to be here
too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Yeah. And just jumping right in. Don't mean to go over you there because you asked the question. Yeah, it's in my book. I mean, I was born in 1944, and my mother had Rh negative blood, so her blood and my blood weren't compatible. So when I was born, I had to have 6 weeks of transfusions to get blood that could carry oxygen. So it's sort of, when I look back, I think, oh, not that all of us don't come in having breathing, but my breathing was challenged in the beginning. At least my blood with my breathing was challenged. So it seems like it was a destiny for me to be studying breath and movement. Yeah, it was when I was a teenager, like around the age of 13, I started to develop asthma around my birthday. And it seemed real obvious to me that it was, a recapitulation of the trauma of my birth. And later on, in around 2003, after having been married and having two children, I'm married to a woman who was a severe asthmatic, and then having a child who was also a severe asthmatic. I really wanted to find something that would work for them, and like a father would do. I sent books on diet, on this, that, and everything. And then, and I think it was 2002, actually, I went to a lecture on the Buteyko breathing method. And I am an anatomy and physiology professor, so the introduction to the Buteyko method was all scientifically based. And I thought, that makes sense to me. That science makes good sense to me. So I put it on my wish list, and fortunately, I got a grant. And in 2003, I went to New Zealand and studied the Buteyko method for a year. It was 5 weeks there, and then ongoing study over the course of the year. But before that, in 1988, I went and saw, I think it was 1993, actually, Emilie Conrad and Continuum movement, which she created. And that really also, within 5 minutes, I knew that was what I was interested in. So putting the two together, that breathing really is something that happens in the body, and continuum movement is something that teaches you how the body works. So having a real embodied and conscious awareness of how my body moves with breathing really facilitates the two, which is why the book is a combination of the Buteyko method and my continuum movement practice. But now I'm a continuum teacher. Continuum movement is now separate from continuum.
Yeah, and you added that to your book. Can you describe a little bit about your continuum movement practice and why you put that in the book?
My continuum practice is an internal. It doesn't have a form. We offer in continuum practice, we offer sounds and breaths and movement, and really basically, and that's why the book is called Transforming Your World and Your Life One Breath at a Time, because as soon as you pay attention right under your nose, breath is moving, not the quality of the breath in that particular moment, or am I breathing correctly or not, but I can feel the movement, the sensations, the touch of breath. Well, as soon as I do that, I'm now paying attention to my internal life. And so that's where the continuum comes in, the internal life of breath. And so once I do that, my context changes immediately from paying attention in the external world. So now I'm paying attention to the internal world. And that's a transformation right in there in itself. And the context of my world is changing because now I'm coming to it from an internal perspective rather than from an external perspective. And so it's very important for me. I like to feel, how do my ribs move? How does my back move? How does all of my body move? That's why it's called the breathable body, because just jumping right into that, the lungs inflate and we live in a skin. And that when the lungs inflate, well, then everything has to move with it. And since we're 2/3 water, it feels like it's a wave breath is a wave. It's the wave of breath that moves the wave of water in the body throughout. And so the potential is to feel that expansion and release of breath everywhere. What limits it is tension. When we hold ourselves real tight, then breath can't move very well. Yeah.
Right. I kind of want to backtrack you back to internal experience, because I think a lot of people on the planet are finding themselves in this internal journey. And there's a lot of talk ever since, lockdown and going through COVID, and that actually forcing everybody to go within. Breathing is a hot topic right now.
It sure is.
Yeah. And I like what you said about it, bringing you back to your center, bringing you back to yourself.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, and again, you have to, what's also important is to stay out of the right or wrong with breathing. It is never right or wrong. And that's a big piece to know about breathing. It always reflects the internal state of either the body or the mind or the health of the body. So like when you're anxious, if you use that as an example, breath is going to be fast. You're not going to feel a nice, easy, slow opening and closing. That's a relaxed state. When you're anxious, it's this way. Or if you're angry and you really got sort of on fire, the breath's going to be hot. So really paying attention to how it's behaving gives you an opportunity to work with its behavior. So when I had COVID and I felt breathless, I thought, oh, wow, okay. Now, what am I going to do about that? I can either panic for my breathlessness, or can I find a slower, quieter, deeper breath within that feels like, okay, I can breathe there. I can't breathe up here, but I can breathe down lower. So having that kind of information that let me, navigate my COVID time without a whole lot of panic. And that's true for any moment. It's like, if I understand how I breathe when I'm anxious, and I can also understand how I breathe when I'm relaxed, can I make that switch from one to the other? And then see what's really going on that's causing me to be anxious.
And you were saying also that you were able to help people who were experiencing the virus for themselves.
In the same way, and especially with long COVID, people when they were really sick, they weren't interested in talking to me at that moment, but afterwards in the recovery period, yes. And also in preparation, a lot of people came to me, well, what am I going to do if I do get COVID? Well, yeah, you have to pay attention, because really where it really got people in trouble was, like, you're breathing up here, the lungs are inflamed, don't have much space. Like I said, and there's more lungs in the back, and there are more lungs lower in the back. How do I get air back where there is some space for me to breathe? And so teaching people how to use their own consciousness and their own body and their own way of taking air in and allowing it to move through really help people with long COVID, especially with the brain fog, because the brain fog is kind of like a lack of oxygen in some cases. Mm-hmm. So getting more oxygen in and getting it moving through the body help people with their brain fog.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I can just talking about breathing, I'm very conscious of my breath as you're talking. Just bringing awareness to the breath. I'm like, okay, how am I breathing right now? Am I remembering to breathe? Am I holding my body, in a tense position, or am I relaxed? Kind of following along as you're saying. And it's really interesting that attention goes where awareness is, right?
Breath follows awareness. Yeah, what you say is really interesting also, because you're referring to your body. This is the vessel for breath. And so a lot of times people are trying to manipulate the breath to make it behave a certain way. Really what you want to do is you're creating a receptivity in the body. How do I make my body receptive for the breath that is arriving now? And like you say, am I tight? Oh, can I really soften and be receptive? And I've been kind of thinking about this a lot, because there's so much conversation about colonialism and colonizing. And the term is people speak about, well, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to, how do I take the next breath? And I think, that's the wrong word. Because taking is, how do I prepare to receive the next breath? The gift of the life that's going to be force that's going to animate my life force. How do I make myself available to receive it? And that changes it. If you think about it right now, it's like, oh, I'm going to take the next breath. Let me take a breath. Okay. Now, have you done that? Now say, all right, I'm going to set myself, let me receive the next breath. And how are those two breaths different?
Wow, that's amazing. It changes it from just being a physical action that I'm taking to really taking me within my body and being aware of, okay, where is the breath going to go when it enters my body is where my mind goes. And then my mind starts following where the breath is going as I'm taking that inhale.
And what do you notice too? This is really important, especially important in terms of the Pateco method, because it's very specific instruction about that. And how Pateco came about was that people were breathing too fast, and he tried to get them to breathe at a slower rate because your body doesn't need as much when people overbreathe. So when you take a breath, how fast is that breath? But when you receive the breath, what happens to the speed and the volume of the breath?
Yeah, I was focused on the breath, but it was a lot slower, it was calmer, and it was fuller as I
So
was.
you achieve the goals immediately just by switching from taking to receiving.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful thing to bring into meditation practice too.
Yeah,
As
and so then you can
on the
take it
breath.
further from there, which I really love, which is, well, okay, can you guide me in how do I set myself up to receive it? Yes, there's the way you just did it, which is an affect. You just put yourself in the space, but then, am I sitting in a position that helps me receive breath better? Especially being upright, not slumped over, same with standing or lying down, just how do I put my body in a shape that makes breath arrive and flow with more ease?
I love that.
That's in the book. Particularly, it's a whole chapter on postures, what to do with your eyes, what to do with your tongue, what to do with your lips, what to do with your body. All of those have a very strong effect on breathing.
So how do those affect our breathing, Robert? Since you
Well, the one that I want to go to right off, I figured you could ask me that. The one I could go to right away, and especially in this medium, is the eyes. Because when we are screen bound, and generally the culture forces us to be, in focal gaze, well, that's a narrowing. So if you're narrowing, the body is going to follow the narrowing, and the body's going to be narrow in its breath. But if you go peripheral and look out here, you can feel already the breath widens, right? And so that's what you want. That makes the body more breathable. This makes the body more focused, which in some cases is good. But 8 hours on Zoom, you're in here all the time. You're really wrecking your breathing, and you're patterning it to a very narrow frame, and it's not useful. So that's one, keeping your eyes peripheral. Even when I'm talking to you, I can see out here. And the next comes from oral facial malfunction, which is the tongue needs to be at the roof of the mouth. And not everybody can do that, but that's where the tongue needs to curl up in the roof of the mouth behind the front teeth. And what that does is it really has an effect on the airway itself. We have a little flap in here, the epiglottis, that falls down. So when we're eating, it blocks the airway, and it's connected to the tongue, which is a good thing. But if your tongue is down low, then it's always occluding the airway. But if you lift your tongue up, it raises this and it allows the flow through the trachea with more ease. Lips are lightly sealed, and I like to lick them just to kind of feel the water tension, and then let the lips rest on the tension of the water. So you're not, and then the teeth are a few millimeters apart. And so that's for the eyes, the lips, the teeth, and the tongue. And then the posture in the book, and the one that comes out of Pateco, which I really like, is the horse rider position, where you sit really on your sit bones, not on your thighs. And your feet are like slightly wider than shoulder width, flat on the floor. And that's a tripod. You have your butt as one, and the 2 feet is a tripod. And each vertebrae, all the way up and down your spine, are also sitting on tripods. Each one they have the disc they sit on, and then they have 2 little feet they sit one top to bottom. So when you sit in the horse rider position, you're sitting in the same alignment as your vertebrae. So you don't have to think about sitting up straight. They just sit up straight, and you try to find neutral where you're not having to lift yourself, but you're just resting down into your pelvis. So that's a sitting posture. In COVID, we're going to go through all of these. In COVID, one of the things that became popular, which we've been teaching for a while, was called proning, where when they ran out of ventilators, they put people on their bellies for 8 hours a day. And what that did was that people were breathless. When you're breathless, I mean, you're facing death, right? So you're scared. So when you're scared, you're like trying to get as much air as you can, and that's going to put it up here. And that's not where all the biggest part of the lungs is, in the back. So they were putting people on their chests, lying them on dining room tables. And that doesn't allow this to open so much. So it forces the air in the back. So it was out. I mean, I think, just jumping to a lot of different places, but I think everybody should in their home should have a pulse oximeter and put on their finger so they can measure their saturation levels, because that's what happened with COVID. When people got below 90, they were in trouble, because that means you're not having enough oxygen in your system's oxygen deprived. So I read this one story when this man came into the hospital near death, 50% saturated with oxygen. That's all he had, was 50%. And they had no ventilator for him. They threw him on his belly, and in 1 minute, he was back to 97.
Wow.
Yeah, it was outstanding. So it's also a good position for sleeping. If you can tolerate sleeping on your belly, it's not a bad position to sleep in. It helps the lungs breathe better. Otherwise, if you're an older human and have more laxity in your jaw and your tongue, then sleeping on your back is not a good idea, because then your tongue can fall back, your jaw can fall back. But you can do exercises for that through my orofacial myofunctional therapy, or lying on your side. Side is better. If you tend to snore a lot, you're better off on your side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, plus I was going to bring up sleep apnea. A
Yeah.
lot of people are suffering sleep apnea,
Yeah.
and that's, blocking the breathing and sending the body into a panic state.
Mm-hmm. It does. It's what it means. It means the body's not breathing. Breathing is suspended, or not breathing, for anywhere from 10 seconds to 2 minutes for some people, and it's a real dangerous thing for heart attacks. And so sleeping on your back, 80% of people who have sleep apnea are undiagnosed.
Wow.
And unless you sleep with somebody who can say, "Hey, I'm just noticing you're not sleeping, you're not breathing," and then you get up gasping and it's waking me up, you don't know. You could be not breathing 60 times per minute. You know that because you're tired all the time, falling asleep at the wheel.
That brings up, for me, as you talk about in your book, the science of respiration. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you brought that into your book, about transforming, the breath, or your world one breath at a time?
Yeah, the biggest thing that really turns people's minds around and makes them a little more conscious, wanting to be more conscious of the breathing. And it's a meme in this culture that has not served anyone, which is, I breathe in the good and I breathe out the bad, right? There is no bad going out. There's just an exchange of gases in and an exchange of gases out. What comes in is oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And what goes out is oxygen and carbon dioxide and nitrogen on the breath. When we breathe out through let me say it back this way. When the body needs to keep a balance in all three of those respiratory gases. And so when you breathe out through your mouth, that's the one side of this. There's also some damage of breathing in through your mouth. When you breathe out through your mouth, you give off too much of your carbon dioxide. And that may sound, well, so what's the problem with that? Well, carbon dioxide, the balance of carbon dioxide in the body, the simplest way to understand it is that it regulates the distribution of oxygen from the blood to the rest of the cells in the body. And that's known as the Bohr effect, and was discovered in 1904. So when carbon dioxide levels are low, oxygen that's inside the red blood cells, it's meant to travel out of the blood and into the cells, cannot. It loses its ability to move. And so the cells get hungry. And the cells need oxygen because they make energy from that oxygen. So, a lot of out breaths lower that, and then you're low on the delivery of oxygen, and those are ailments: brain fog, lethargy, snoring, some other ones that I'm trying to just think right now, a sense of anxiousness. The body is like, we're hungry for oxygen. We don't feel like we can settle down. We're hungry. The cells are hungry. So you've led me into this conversation about the value of nose breathing, because
Sure.
on the other end of it,
You read my mind.
yeah, on the other end of it, breathing in but you breathe through your mouth as often as you eat through your nose. That's the potato thing. It's kind of corny. Most people like it, most people laugh, but you breathe through your mouth as often as you eat through your nose. And you pace your activity level so that you can use your nose almost all the time for breathing. Because when you breathe in, and you can do this, I like to teach this, when you put your hand on your chest and you put your hand on your belly and you take a couple of breaths in through your nose, and we'll get to the conversation about what happens if your nose is stuffed. We'll get to that. You breathe in and out. You just kind of track what part of your body is moving. Is your belly, is your diaphragm working, which you would feel if your belly expands naturally. Your chest is going to feel like it inflates from the inside. And then you take the state of your nervous system. Are you relaxed? Are you anxious? And then you revert to breathing in through your mouth. And then you watch what happens. Where does the breath go? Usually it comes up here. And what happens to your nervous system? People start to get a little agitated. And that's what happens. It triggers the autonomic nervous system to go on alert. It would be the same thing. If a bear came in the front door, you'd go, and you'd be totally, on alert, narrow vision. I don't care what's going on around me. My life is in danger. I got to get as much air as I can. Good thing. But if you're doing it all day long, you're inciting your own anxiety constantly by using your mouth to breathe. And so it changes the shape of the face, and there's all kinds of other things that happen for it. Because there are over 30 physiological benefits in nose breathing that don't happen when you mouth breathe. You can't get those benefits.
Wow, that takes me back to something that I learned years ago. I want to say 20 years ago. A teacher of mine said, if you're feeling tired and you want to wake up, breathing in fast through the mouth, repetitively, and then exhaling. And as you're describing it, yes, because it's like triggering that anxious, like panic in the body. Of course, the body's going to wake up because it doesn't want to die, right?
Right.
Great.
But really, now it leads to the conversation about the quality of the air.
Oh,
The quality of the air today is unbreathable, unfortunately. I mean, it's a negative side of this conversation, unfortunately. 99% of the world's population does not have clean air to breathe on a daily basis. That's 99%. The World Health Organization considers air a cancer-causing agent. 9 million people die a year from air pollution and microplastics. So if you open your mouth to breathe, there's no filtering going on. I mean, at least the nose, which is the guardian of the lungs, that's how I say it, at least you get a chance to filter some of that out. You breathe into your mouth, it's going all in.
wow.
But and the more you use your nose to breathe, the less it's going to be stuffed. And there are, you can blow your nose, you can use sea salt or neti pots. In Buteyko, we take a breath in, if you can, through your nose. Out, you pinch your nose, and you bob your head until you feel a slight urge to breathe. And you breathe through your nose like you're smelling a rose. And if you have any heart issues or, compromising diseases, probably only 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, if you're healthy, then you can do it until you feel an urge. And the key here is the gentle, kind, loving breath you want to take, because that sends a signal. Oh, we can relax our defenses in here, the mucus, we can relax it a little bit. It's like when I think I said it, it's like if you were smelling a rose, sometimes the odors are so subtle. You can't go to a rose and do that. You have to kind of look for the odors in the air, right? So you're breathing kind of like that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
It
Thanks for
works.
sharing that breathing practice. And thank you for breathing that up or bringing it up about, our air quality. And it's yet another reason why we really need, to be vigilant and conscious about saving our planet and what, chemicals are we putting out there and what are we putting in our water supply? What are we putting in our air? Because we are breathing it. Do we want clean air or do we want toxic air?
Yeah, I think the conversation needs to be more widespread, because if we are really conscious of our breathing and we have this value for it, then we could be a little more angry about how we're treating it. It's really stupid of us. We ruin the soil, we ruin the water, and now it makes people anxious. It really does. The whole COVID piece made people frightened of the air.
Yeah.
Just going to the airport. And so my stepdaughter coined the term fractious. You get frantic because you're not knowing what's safe, and you're anxious. So she put the two words together and called it fractious.
Oh, I love that. And I like how you said the value of air.
Yes. We don't really, I mean, I think we do, if you ask anybody, sure. Oh yeah, I want clean air. But go along and endure the discomfort of unclean air, which is why I think nobody's done a study on this, but we did know in COVID that people were sicker in places that there were more air pollution. Though the air pollution was a compromising condition for people, which is why New York was so bad. Also, because you had 9/11 and so many of those people were there were 9/11. That air was awful in New York.
Yeah, so they were already compromised. Yeah.
So, but they did do studies to show that the populations where the air was worse, that people were sicker.
Well, do you have any recommendations for, breathing and, air quality in your home that you might be able to share?
Yeah, everybody should have air filters. I'm not allowed to recommend any, but you can certainly research them. There's so many out on the market now, and I do suggest you get one that also reads back to you the quality of the air in your house. I have a separate air monitor that I recommend, but they're available. But the new ones now are showing you that, because you'll be actually shocked to see when you're cooking, go look at that air monitor and see what the condition of the air in your house. Cooking just destroys the air quality. And it's not a big deal if you live in a place where you can open the doors and windows, but if there's fire, this is the whole issue when there's fires around. If you can't open the doors and windows, you can't cook in the house, especially if you have compromising air lungs, like an asthma, COPD, or anything.
Yeah, and turn on your vent. Yeah. Turn on your vents. I'm going to change the topic. So because I want to jump into your second chapter, because I love this, in your book talks about the sensuous nature of breathing. And so talk about, how is breath a sensual experience and how can we feel that for ourselves?
Well, it leads to the conversation about people wanting to feel present in their life. To high value on presence. And when we're in touch with our senses rather than our mind, when we're feeling, when we're smelling, we're right in the experience at the moment. When I track the movement of my breath, I'm being touched by breath. That's the only way I know it's in my nostrils and in my lung. It's touching the touch receptors. So the question is, if I breathe gently and with an attitude of kindness and gentleness, oh, that kind of feels good in my body. It moves through in a kind and gentle way. Well, that's the kind of touch I would like from somebody else when they touch me. So that's a sensual, using the sense of touch makes it sensuous. That rather than the right or wrong, or I'm breathing correctly, I'm feeling my breath with my senses, which makes it sensuous. That's how I think of it. And so if I'm breathing well and quietly and my body is relaxed and I can feel the wave of breath moving through me, it's pleasurable. It's sensuous to me.
And what benefits then would that have on our life and, feeling, that pleasure in our body and that sensual feeling and a juiciness?
It sends a signal to the nervous system that it's in a state, or it's moving to a state of relaxation.
Nice.
instead of the state of fractious.
Right, fractious. I like that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it sends a signal. Oh, okay. Well, let me just relax for a minute. Let me just be in the. And I like saying it this way, because if you tell somebody to rest, or you tell somebody to relax, they really don't. That's a kind of an abstract term. But breath is the teacher. I'm just the guide. I've just studied breath for so many. Study it every day. Ask it what it wants to teach me today. What do I need to remember? What do I need to learn? But the exhale is a phenomenon that can't be beat. Is when you exhale, your body is becoming less inflated. And so you're moving back towards earth. You can feel yourself sort of sinking downward, right, on the exhale. And also noticing that you're more, if you put your attention there, you can recognize, oh, I can feel more weighted, not my weight, but weighted. When I breathe in, oh, I'm feeling more of the spaciousness and the openness. When I exhale, I'm feeling more of the weightedness. Well, when I'm weighted and I'm moving downward, I'm landing on something. I'm landing on the seat. I'm landing on my feet are on the floor. So I'm like the earth itself, I'm settling inside of myself downward. So if I can allow myself to settle and I land on the surface of what I'm settling on, that's where I can rest after I've settled. So I settle first, and from there, rest comes. And then when I breathe in, this is also the other part that I really like. When I breathe in, I keep my awareness of where I'm settled, what I'm meeting, where my ground is. I keep that in my awareness. And then breath stays really low down, and I don't need as much, because if I'm tense, I need more breath. Tension drives breathing. If I'm settled, then breath gets small and less. I don't need as much. It's like a baby in a crib, and you can hardly tell they're breathing sometimes, because they just, they're not worried about the stock market. They're just like, and like a dog or a cat, you can come by and pick them up with a shovel when they really settle onto the ground, right? That's what we want. We want to be so settled that we need so little breath. That's the way to get breath small. And when you need more, you can get more from being, connected. And that's another aspect of breathing. When you feel like your body is connected to the earth and to yourself, your internal, you engender the sense of, oh, I feel connected. I feel connected to myself. I feel connected to my environment. And that's a good thing, to feel connected. We're all one connection. That's the biggest driving force in the world, is the desire to feel connected, whether it's to the trees, or whether it's to the air, or whether it's to my breath, or whether it's to other people. I feel lost and isolated when I don't feel connected. So for me, my breath is my ally. It's like, there I am, I'm connected. And then I can be connected to you here on the call, and anybody I run into.
And who doesn't take that breath when they step into the woods or in the forest, and they're going to take that hike? It's that big breath that everybody takes when they first enter in. Yeah.
Yeah, because the smells are bringing you into the present moment too, right?
Right.
And
I like what you said about it being your teacher and ally. And you said that on your recent Hay House live on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Breath as a teacher, ally, and companion to nurture your life.
Did I say that?
You did.
That's a good line. I have to remember that.
You need to put that in a post.
Yeah, it definitely does nurture my life, and that's what it's meant to do. It's the animating force. My attitude towards it is it's a sacred gift. I mean, if you're looking for the sacred, there it is in the gift of breath. It's, you're receiving it. We are a community in the human world of 8 billion breathers, all breathing the same atmosphere. So every breath you take in is a connection to everybody else, not to even count the animals and the insects and the birds and all that other stuff. It's also using the same air. So it's a huge profanity to pollute it, because it's so sacred. Yeah. And we are so in community with everyone else who breathes. There's
and just you saying that, Yeah. And just you saying that opened up the perception in my mind. I instantly visualized the whole entire planet breathing together.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I used to say this more. It's coming back. I'm glad to bring it up. There's a personal responsibility of the kind of breath we put back in the air, because if we put back, when, and I'm not saying we're at fault for it, but if your life is filled with anxiety, there's a driving force for that anxiety. Well, the breath is going to include all of those molecules of anxiety that are being put back in the air. And we know that breath is a communication. You can be with somebody who's very anxious, and right away, you can feel it in your own body, because the breathing is the message, is the communication that says they're real anxious. Somebody's real settled. That's another communication. So breath communicates.
Nice. I like that. And that's a way, just thinking about that, breath communicates, brings you within yourself.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Once again, back to your inner world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. And who doesn't want, that peace and ease in their life? I know I value peace and ease and relaxation, and a breath is a portal to that peace and ease in life and relaxation.
Yeah, and we have to have this. I mean, it's so hard, I think, in today's culture. I mean, it's a difficult place to be living in, and difficult time with the climate the way it is, and with viruses on the brink for us to know and say, okay, I'm going to work with myself in a way. That's why people like yoga and people like all kinds of exercise, because it brings some relaxation. So really being able to connect to, well, how do I work with my breath to receive it in a way that soothes me, even though I know my circumstances are crazy, but right now I need a break from that. And so taking myself away from all the thoughts of that to the direct experience of my breathing is a little bit more of home, rather than a little bit more of worrying about what the culture is doing.
I like that. Definitely need to take our minds away from what the culture is doing sometimes. Yeah.
But yeah, our attention can't, like, our attention is pretty specific. And when we're in our body and our attention's in our body, it's not in our mind.
Mm-hmm. And when our attention's in our body, we tend to breath hold or overbreathe, like you talk about in your book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the two dynamics I write about in the book. One is overbreathing, people who breathe, more than the Western medicine. Here's the standard. Western medicine says 18 breaths per minute. That's one breath every 4 seconds. But Dr. Pateco really liked the idea of one breath every 5 seconds, which is 12 breaths per minute. Yoga for years has been saying 4 to 6 breaths per minute is really the optimal. And now with science catching up to yoga, 4 to 6 breaths, but 3.5 to 7 breaths per minute is resonant frequency breathing, where the heart and the breath and everything's working in concert with each other. They're in resonance with each other, rather than the faster, which keeps the body out of resonance in its organ function, and keeps the body, anxious. So learning how to, like we just did, just receive the breath, drop into where the ground is, automatically shifts that. And you go, oh, wow, that's a whole different reality right now. I'm quieter. I'm instantaneously quieter. And I prefer going to the body for it, rather than, I mean, some of those other exercises, we do them in Biteko too, box breathing and holding your breath at times. And to build up the carbon dioxide when you've dissipated it. You do some breath holds to get your carbon dioxide levels up. But yeah, we were on the conversation of too much breath, and then there's the one of breath holding. Mm-hmm. I talk about it in two ways. One is you don't breathe. Obviously, you're holding your breath. You're either holding it on the inhale or you're holding it on the exhale. It's a common practice. People do it all the time. I find myself doing it too. If I'm nervous or anxious, I'll hold my breath. Why? It stops movement, and anxiety is movement. So if I hold my breath, there's none of that's going to go on right now. I'm going to get a break from that movement. The other way of holding the breath is holding it in a small container, being really tense so the breath can't in its capacity. So I hold it tight. I contain it. I restrain it. I suppress it. And that's one of the things that I really like in Gabor Mate's book, which I talked about before that. But even so, when we suppress feelings or we constrain ourselves to not allow ourselves to be fully expressive in who we are and be ourselves, then we are constraining our breathing as well. So in trauma, and it's a life-saving device, if we suppress the memories and suppress the feelings, suppression takes a lot of energy. The act of suppressing something from rising up in the body in memory or in feelings is a lot of energy, and that you're suppressing the breath. That's a form of breath holding. You're holding the breath to a small expression, and it can't nourish that way. The movement of breath is as important as the oxygen and the gases that come in. The movement nourishes the body, teaches the body how to move.
I love that.
In grace.
You also brought up something during your Facebook Live, the recent loss of your wife, and how breath was a gift for you, the ability for your breath to come up and carry the grief of your late wife.
Yeah, she died 4 months ago. We were together 38 years. And, we were talking before this, she liked to say we were symbionts. We shared the same air for 38 years. And the grief is really powerful and strong. And I can feel it rising. And if I learned this a long time ago from Men Boys Don't Cry. And how do you not cry? Well, you tighten. That's how you stop your crying. You just tighten right there. I saw that as I began to learn about that. And it's the same with grief. If I tighten, it won't come up. It needs to come up. And a lot of people talk about getting choked up, right? Well, I'm not letting the sounds of grief up. And sounds are just audible breath. And so the wailing and the moaning and the crying, I really had to let them move. And that tells me, everybody says it, and it's true, how much I loved her. I wouldn't be crying so hard if I didn't love her so much and miss her. But I needed that expression. Otherwise, I'd feel like it's too painful to hold it back, way too painful.
Yeah. And I like what you said, the grief as a big expression of breath. And I really loved that because, as you know, as we spoke before, the loss of my mother a year ago in February, and how that was, and very much like coming into my body and into my breath and into my grief and into that, release of breath and emotion, from my body during my grieving process.
Yeah, I did one of the things that I was like shocked. Who is this person? Me? I've been lying on the couch for 2 days crying. Seriously. And I think, oh my God, really? Yeah. She said, you're gonna miss me more than you know. She was right. Yeah, it was sweet. But it softens me. It softened, all the ways that I, in the past, have protected myself, the personas that I may have put on to be liked or whatever. It's like, I can't hold on to those anymore. The grief is changing me. It's softening my tissues, and that's a good thing. It's opening my heart.
It does do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to point out, we've talked about COVID. A lot of people lost loved ones, during COVID. It continues. There seems to be just an uptick in loss, period. These days I have, not only myself, but also friends who are losing loved ones, right now, or have lost loved ones this year. And what can we do with our breath to help ease our grief and help bring up the emotion, with the grief that we need to process through?
Yeah, first of all, grief usually gets expressed through the mouth too. So that's, I'm giving, there's your dispensation to use your mouth for breathing. And breathing, when you're making an emotional expression, of course, it's going to come through the mouth. But what I do is I get really quiet. I sit or lie down really quiet, and I go, okay. I ask myself, I follow my breath in and go, what am I feeling? What's going on? And boy, it's just right there. It's just right there. And so I just let it come up. I just let it come up. But I have to give it time to ask what I'm feeling, not to just keep myself distracted all the time. I do plenty of that. After a while, it gets And just from TV. Thank you very much. Um, but yeah, it's just I get a feeling for it. It's like something's going heavy on my back, or I'm just really tired and I shouldn't be tired. I think, okay, something's wanting to come up and I need to feel what it is. So I get really quiet. Usually I'll lie down on my side, curl up in a little ball, a little bit. What is going on here? And I said, generally speaking, it's right there. Some memory, some thought, just aren't something, and sometimes there's nothing attached to it other than it just wants to rise up and express itself.
Thank you for sharing that. And this
Yeah.
is going to lead into an experience. Would you want to share a breathing experience with our audience? And of course, if anybody's listening to this and you're driving down the road, please press pause and do this when you're not in movement or operating heavy machinery, right?
Well, one of my favorites, thank you. Sorry. One of my favorites is really to teach somebody I mean, yes, we just said it in the beginning, I'm going to adopt an attitude of receptivity. And that seems to do it. But we do have a way of, pulling breath in. We try to get it. We're doing the breathing. How do I let the body breathe me so that the resistances that may have come from old patterns of teaching me how to breathe, can relax themselves so air can flow more easily inward and outward. And this is an old yoga sutra from at least 5,000 years old. And it's really simple. And it's on my website. Breathable Body you can click the meditation and it'll take you through it. We're going to do it here. Is when you're breathing in, it's strictly another thought process. You think the syllable sa, S-A, one thought of sa all the way through the inhale. And you watch how your body receives breath. And you can play with this a little bit and go back and say, well, all right, if I don't do that, how do I breathe? Oh, I see. I'm pulling air in. I'm trying to get air in my body. And you can play with that too. When you pull your own air in, you can kind of feel your chest gets tight. But when you think sa, you may notice that the chest expands a little bit more and that the air is flowing through without a whole lot of effort on your part up in the face. So the air, how I say this is instead of you breathing you, the lungs are pulling the air through you. They're changing their dimension, which changes their atmospheric pressure, which changes the diffusion factor, which allows air to come in. So I'm getting out of the way. I'm not actively doing it. I'm letting my lungs do it. And when I breathe out, I think ha, through the whole exhale. And ha, and the exhale is passive. There's no energy. It's like I breathe in with sa, and then I just sit in my seat and let the air leave with no effort in my face at all. When then the reflex hit, I breathe with sa again. So it's really coming from my body. My breath is really arising from my body moving rather than here. And ha, it leaves and I deflate. And after a while, when you practice that, you get a feel, a felt sense for it. And then you don't have to think those words. You just know automatically, wait a minute, I'm doing a lot of grabbing for breath. Oh, that's better. It's much slower. Body's breathing me. A little more sensuous. Now, some bodies like it the other way around. Ha, sa. So if sa-ha doesn't work for you, think, okay, let me try ha-sa. For some, that works better. But it's a bit of a mind distraction. And the reflex is what's happening. The lungs, the reflex happens based on the chemistry in the body. So when the reflex happens, the lungs respond instead of you just jumping in. Because a lot of times people don't finish their exhales. So they're breathing too fast because they don't allow the exhale to finish, which means they're breathing up here. This way, you can kind of let the body go through its cycle on its own.
Oh, I love that meditation. That's one of my favorite meditations that I learned in 2017 when I did the Raja Yoga meditation and yoga class through Yogananda's Institute here in Seattle. Was a Hong Sa meditation. And as you're talking through, my body wants to go right into the meditation and immediately starts breathing from the presence of the breath in the exhale and slows down, feels the fullness of the breath and the present moment. And I almost want to kind of check out. I'm wanting to bring myself back to presence now so I can be present with you, Robert, and with our
But the
listeners.
quality of your presence with me now after being present with yourself changes, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah,
It
that's
is.
how you change your world.
Yeah,
Change your life internally, change your world externally.
that
How you
is
behave in it.
so true. And it
One
changes how you interact with, everyone in your life and in your world. It really is a gift.
Yeah, and if you're in the paradigm of wanting to think about mindfulness, you could say it this way: you're being mindful of how your body's breathing, and then when you're mindful internally, you'll be mindful in your external actions.
Yes.
Rather than trying to force a mindfulness, you just are mindful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It just comes naturally. Yes. And what I always say, this world would be a way better place if everybody was like that.
I totally agree.
Right?
I know it's true in my day. If I get anxious and behave in a frantic way, I just go, "Oh, wait a minute. I know that pattern. Oh, that's better." Take one breath and kind of switch the pattern. I
Yes.
think once you practice a lot. I mean, I like to practice. The idea in classes is to have people engage in a practice 5 minutes, 12 times a day if they can, just for 5 minutes. Because what you're doing is you just go, oh, just like you did right now. Oh, wow, that feels much better. So I live in that space for 5 minutes and I really get a sense of what it feels like. And then I'll know more quickly when I'm not. And by practicing it over and over, I get quicker access. I go, oh, I know how to make that change really quickly. And that's what we want. So it's not to be a chore to do it so much, but just to kind of build in a distinction between what feels relaxing and what doesn't. And how do I make that shift with more ease and even in one breath? So even if I only do 2 minutes, I know how I can get back to a quieter place for myself. Because we're really meant to live in settled and rested most of the time. We're not meant to live in motivated, anxious states. It destroys the health of the body.
And I like how you pointed out to our listeners that once you've done that practice for a while, it brings you to like that natural awareness when you're not in that state.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
which is really
So
important to realize. It
yeah,
becomes
opens up choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of gifts of breath, I always love to ask my guests for a jewel of wisdom to end our conversation now that we're coming to the end of our hour. So do you have a jewel of wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners before we
I
wrap up?
have 4.
Oh, I love that.
So you breathe through your mouth as often as you eat through your nose. It's the same thing with talking. I finish a sentence, my breath is done. I breathe back through my nose, take a moment to breathe back through my nose. I keep myself quiet in the conversation. So that's the way in, because most people when they talk start doing a lot of that. But the three things that I really like to speak about in terms of the sacredness of breath is there are no two breaths that are ever alike. Each breath is built on what happened in the last breath. So each breath from the previous is our ancestors of the current breath. Everything in life comes and goes. The breath teaches us that it comes and it leaves. Everything does that. Thoughts, images. So we really have to let go of the idea that we're stuck in something. It's here for a moment and then disappears. Breath is the teacher for that. Here it is. Now it's leaving. And you never know if you're going to get another breath after the one you just took. So pay attention. Be thankful. Ride the birth of your life force on the inhale. And recognize when you exhale, you may never get another one. And you're just letting this particular moment disappear into the emptiness to arise again if the heart desires for another breath.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful, Robert. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome. You're
And
welcome.
his life is limited. We never know when our last breath is going to be. It's valuable.
No, that was when I watched my wife take her last breath. It was like, oh my goodness, there it is.
There it
Not
is.
another.
Yeah.
That brings tears to my eyes.
Oh, thank you for sharing your heart with us, Robert. I
You're
appreciate that. And
welcome.
thank you for
Thanks for the
sharing your
invitation.
time. This has been a beautiful interview. Thank you so much for joining me. And how can our listeners find you, Robert?
Yeah, you can find me at thebreathablebody.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook too. But there in lots of classes. I've got classes coming up. I've got a basic class, just a 1-day class for giving good basic information, and a 3-day class, and then a 6-month training if you want to really delve deeply into it.
Awesome.
And there's blogs and videos and all kinds of stuff on there.
Yeah, everybody definitely check out Robert Litman's, website, thebreathablebody.com, and check
buy
out
the book.
and buy the book.
I don't have one in front of me. How could I be so foolish not to have one in front of me? Yeah. Buy the book, The Breathable Body, Transforming Your World and Your Life One Breath at a Time.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you, Robert. Robert, it was a pleasure to host you. Thank you again for joining me. And thank you everyone for joining me again. This is Raise the Vibe with Liz, and I'm your host, Liz Peterson. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Raise the Vibe with Liz, or my website, lizshealingtouch.com. Go ahead and reach out and say hi. Thanks everybody for joining us. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.